Our topic is the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on the Indonesian economy. The Russian-Ukrainian war, which lasted almost a month, had a major impact on the movement of the global economy. So how did the Ukraine and Russia conflict actually happen? This conflict has been going on since Ukraine declared independence on August 24, 1999. This year, the Soviet Union collapsed with the resignation of the then Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. The majority of Ukrainians voted for independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. Relations between Russia and Ukraine were volatile from the start, but the situation escalated after the then pro-Russian president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, rejected the economic integration of the European Union and was ousted by the Ukrainian parliament in 2014. Well, this year then triggers the existence of two camps, namely pro-European Union and also pro-Russia. The Russian supporters who later became separatists occupied the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Well, in 2022, or to be precise on February 21, these two regions were recognized for their independence by Russia, but it's not yet recognized worldwide. In the Luhansk and Donetsk areas, there was a conflict between the residents there and the Kiev army, where the residents there were still pro-with Russia and forced them to be independent from Ukraine. Then in 2015, there was actually a Minsk agreement, but it has not gone smoothly until now because Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of violating the ceasefire between the two countries, until finally, at the end of February 2022, Russia launched an invasion or military aggressions against Ukraine. So how actually the Russian and Ukraine economy? The economy of Russia has gradually transformed from a planned economy into a market-oriented economy. It has enormous natural resources, particularly oil and natural gas. According to the Wikipedia, Russia is the fifth largest economy in Europe, with Germany about 4.3 trillion US dollar, France about 3.2 trillion, United Kingdom 3.1 trillion, Italy 2.1 trillion, and Russia on the fifth place 1.7 trillion. Russia also is the world's 11th largest economy by nominal GDP and the 6th largest by PPP. It is the world's leading natural gas exporter, the second largest natural gas producer, and the second largest oil exporter and producer. Russia's foreign exchange reserves are the world's fifth largest. Russia's vast geography is an important determinant of its economic activity, with some resources estimating that the nation contains over 30% of the world's natural resources. On the other hand, the economy of Ukraine is a lot more different with the Russia. The economy of Ukraine is an emerging free market economy. In April 2020, the World Bank reported that the Ukraine economic growth was solid at 3.2% in 2019, led by a good agricultural harvest and sectors dependent on domestic consumptions. However, in 2020, GDP collapsed by 4.4% due to COVID-19 pandemic. Ukraine's economic freedom score is 54.1, making its economy the 130th freest in the 2022 index. Ukraine is ranked 44th among 45 countries in the Europe region, and its overall score is below the regional and world averages. Before we talk about the impact of Russia-Ukraine war on Indonesian economy, we are going to discuss about how this war that created by two countries impact on the global economy. The status of Russia and Ukraine as one of the world's food and energy barons is one of the factors why the conflict between the two countries so affect commodity prices and the pace of global trade. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine will affect the global economy via three main channels: financial sanctions. On February 28, the US unveiled a sanctions package targeting the Central Bank of Russia, or CBR. The European Union has followed suit. These sanctions will prevent the CBR from accessing about half of the 643 billion US dollar that it holds in foreign exchange reserves by blocking its ability to convert assets held in US dollars and euros into rubles. The measure also prevents Russia from tapping its Emergency Sovereign Wealth Fund on the National Wealth Fund, or NWF. In addition, the US and the European Union have announced that some Russian banks will be cut off from SWIFT, the global payment system. The second main channel is also commodities prices. Commodities prices will remain elevated for months. Commodities prices could jump owing to three factors: concerns around supplies, the destructions of physical infrastructure, and sanctions. Oil price will remain above $100 per barrel as long as conflict rages in Ukraine. The threat of sanctions on Russia hydrocarbon exports and uncertainty surrounding supplies will exacerbate existing market tightness. Some oil traders are also avoiding Russia oil out of concern about US secondary sanctions on financial transactions with Russia entities. Gas price will rise by at least 50% this year, on top of a five-fold rise last year. Europe has limited gas stockpiles, and there are concerns about gas supplies for the 2022-23 Northern Hemisphere winter season. Russia is also a major producer of several base metals such as aluminum, titanium, palladium, and nickel, all of which will register price jumps. Following spikes in all of these markets last year, prices will remain at peak levels as long as the conflict continues. Prices of agricultural commodities such as wheat, maize, barley, and rapeseed will soar. Taken together, Ukraine and Russia account for more than a quarter of the global wheat trade and produce 12% of calories consumed globally. Disruption to trade routes in the Black Sea would increase pressure on grain prices. Not only commodities prices, and also financial sanctions. The third one is supply chains will be disrupted. Financial sanctions will have an impact on supply chains and trade, as companies will struggle to find financial channels through which to conduct trade with Russia. Disruption to supply chains will come from three sources: difficulties affecting land-based routes. Land-based trade routes between Asia and Europe will be disrupted as transit through Russia become more difficult or impossible from a compliance, reputational, or safety perspective. This will particularly affect some Chinese companies which had increased their traffic over land-based routes through Russia as an alternative to sea and air freight during the coronavirus pandemic. Air tires between Russia and Europe will be severely hampered following the decision of EU countries to close their airspace to Russian aircraft and cargo. About 35% of global freight was being transported by air prior to the pandemic, about half of which was carried on passenger planes. Sea freight routes through the Black Sea will be cancelled for several weeks following Ukraine's decision to shut down commercial shipping and Turkey's move to restrict transit through the Bosphorus. This situation will have a notable impact on grain shipments transiting through Ukrainian, Russian, and possibly Bulgarian and Romanian ports. These three supply chains will be disrupted, not only affecting European Union countries but also the global all of the countries such as Indonesia also included. So now, because we already talked about how this war impacting the global economy, we are going to discuss about how this war impacting Indonesian economy. The positives impact. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine did have a positive impact on Indonesia's trade balance, especially the increasing demand for the mining and palm oil sectors. The heating up of Russia, Ukraine, and their supporting countries is like a double-edged sword for the Indonesian economy. Indonesia in this situation can boost the marketing of a number of products in the energy sector through coal and oil and gas commodities. The reason is that Russia's energy needs, especially for electricity generation in European countries, are usually met with gas fuel. However, due to the war, Russia had to find a substitute for its energy source. One of the substitutions is to reuse coal, and that is owned by Indonesia. The conflict between the two countries has boosted the price of energy commodities, which are the mainstay of Indonesia's exports. The current escalating war situation is actually beneficial for the economies of commodity producing countries. Price increases have started to occur in oil, gas, and coal. Not only the problem of the trade balance, which experienced a surplus, but also tax revenue, which has also been boosted. According to Finance Minister Sri Mulyani, the surge in commodity prices and increasing global demand prompted tax payments from the mining business sector in January 2022 to more than double. We can see and know that there are positive impacts for our economy, but let's see the negatives impact. Ukrainian accounts for a third of Indonesia wheat imports. This conflict will push up the price of wheat, which will have an impact on the prices of bread, cereals, and instant noodles. Last year, Indonesia purchased $949 million of wheat from Ukraine. The government must be aware of rising inflation that may be driven by these global conditions. Indonesia's economic impact from the Russia-Ukraine tension will be most felt in the financial sector. This can be seen from the condition of the rupiah, which has weakened and moved at 14,500 rupiahs and could continue to move closer to the level of 15,000 rupiahs. In conditions of conflict, if the escalation becomes wider and involves many countries, this could have an impact on stability in the region, and of course this will harm the prospects for recovery, monetary stability in Indonesia, because it coincides with the tapering off and the increase in interest rates that occurred in the country. Exchange rate fluctuations. The consequences is that BUMNs that have a large debt-to-equity ratio must be vigilant. This is because the crisis in Ukraine also created two key factors, one of which was fluctuation in the exchange rate, which increased the burden of foreign debt. This includes loan interest, which will also be more expensive. The trend of rising interest rates will be faster, so loan interest will also rise. From this conflict, global inflation also happened, which affect Indonesian domestic inflation. The economic impact of the conflict will be felt mostly in Ukraine and Russia, which will both experience sharp recessions this year. Those Eastern European countries that are most exposed to trade with Russia, such as Lithuania and Latvia, will also take a hit from the conflict. Elsewhere in Europe, the European Union will suffer from an energy supply chain and trade shock.